Today on the Inside Scoop, Oklahoma gets it done. Miami goes 1 for 2, but nearly pulls off the surprise of the summer. And we're going to talk Georgia's Final Five. Let's get the show started. Do me a favor, like this video and subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel. For all you recruiting fans, it's here. One-stop shopping for all your recruiting needs. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and let's get started. All right. Oklahoma fans, are you over the trauma of David Hicks last year? Have you gotten over Nwaneri going to Mizzou over Oklahoma just a few weeks ago? David Stone became an increasingly must-get recruit for the Sooners, and they closed on Saturday. There's some guys Brent Venables has to get on the interior defensive line to run the defense that he wants. You know that he needs big athletic tackles that can eat up blocks, create space for the linebackers to get to the football, but also has the quickness and length to get to the passer. That's what David Stone brings to this roster. And Oklahoma might not be done adding elite talent to that defensive line just yet. Let's bring on national recruiting analyst Sam Spiegelman. Sam, is this the biggest commitment on the defensive side of the ball for the Sooners since 2006 Gerald McCoy?
I know that the Sooner fan base certainly thinks so. I mean, this is a really high-profile recruit, and you just mentioned it, Josh. This is a defensive-minded head coach in Brent Venables who has reinforcements on his coaching staff that specialize in edge defenders and interior defensive tackles. And the way that Brent Venables wants Oklahoma to run, the lifeblood is on that defensive front. We know that he got a big home run get last year in five-star PJ Adewale. And they've so far been waiting for the D-line to come together. And David Stone is certainly the centerpiece for Oklahoma fans in this 2024 cycle. He has been a national recruit in the headlines for 3+ years already. He's originally from Oklahoma City, which almost adds to the pressure for Brent Venables of keeping him away from Miami, Texas A&M, Michigan State, and others. But yeah, is it the biggest recruit? PJ Adewale was a pretty big recruit for Brent Venables last year in his first year at Oklahoma. Peyton Bowen was a colossal flip at the end of the 2023 cycle. But yeah, if you're talking about the future and making sure all those pieces are in place, you have to like where Oklahoma sits now moving forward with David Stone and maybe a few others up front down the road.
To you about what this could mean for Oklahoma, and could this be the start of a defensive renaissance for Oklahoma, especially up on that defensive line? Because coming up on September 9th, 4-star top 100 defensive lineman Nigel Smith out of Melissa, Texas, is going to be ready to make his decision. Do the Sooners have a chance to land him as well?
Yeah, we talked about David Stone being a priority target along the defensive front for Brent Venables. The same has been the case for Nigel Smith, another top 100 blue chip defensive lineman that's been a national recruit since he was a sophomore at Melissa. He's going to commit on the first week in the new Melissa Cardinal Stadium. It's $1 million+ stadium in Dallas, Fort Worth area. It seems to be a two-team race as September 9th nears. Oklahoma has and continues to be the favorite on the On3 recruiting prediction machine. And Texas A&M has hosted them for back-to-back visits from the end of June and then again in July. Two-team race between the Aggies and the Sooners. I still like where Oklahoma sits. And then when you talk about a defensive front with David Stone and Nigel Smith, you were talking about two of the best defensive linemen, two versatile defensive linemen that can work off the edge, on the interior. They're the kind of guys that Todd Bates and Miguel Chavis drool over as they look toward the future of this defense.
All right. Now, there's another elite defensive lineman that's going to make his decision actually on September 1st. So let's go backward a step to Dominick McKinley, the #1 player in the state of Louisiana. And Oklahoma's been in it for him for a while now, but we're only 5 days away from his decision. What's the latest intel on Dominick McKinley?
Yeah, the number 17 player in the On 300 for 2024, and he's finally going to make his decision. Dominick McKinley told me that he made this decision about a month plus ago, and that going into September 1st, he feels even more confident in his decision. Reading the writing on the wall, you've heard about 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 teams thrown out with Dominick McKinley. At the front, you have Texas and Texas A&M. I've updated my RPM, and I believe the Longhorns and the Aggies are in the best position heading into Friday. And then you hear a little bit of buzz about LSU, which has kind of closed the gap with those Texas-based teams over the summer. Of course, they had a defensive line coaching change, and Frank Wilson has got more involved with the home state Tigers. And you hear a lot of buzz about Ohio State. His best relationship might be with D-line coach Larry Johnson, who's got a couple of 5-stars already committed in the Buckeyes class. If there is a dark horse in this race, it might be Ohio State if he is to go out of state as we expect.
That is going to be a battle in these final few days before his big decision. Now, what about 4-star defensive lineman Danny Okoye? He's been talking to Texas. He's been talking to Tennessee. Oklahoma, though, also heavily involved. Do they have a shot at landing him?
Absolutely. You talk about a team that made a lot of strides over the summer with the state's #1 recruit. Tennessee has hosted Danny Okoye the most, and I think if a decision were to be made, August 28th today, I like where Tennessee stands. But Oklahoma has closed this gap. I think that they're running #2 right here, and I think Texas, LSU, and Alabama are all gearing up for a couple of big September visits for Danny Okoye as he looks to move closer to the finish line of his recruitment. People point to Tennessee holding on and Oklahoma surging. Those are the two teams you hear the most. LSU and Texas are also very much involved. But I think it comes down to either the Vols making a big splash in Oklahoma or the Sooners rounding out a really great defensive line class with this edge defender.
Yeah. All right. So you take those three names, Sooner fans, you put them away, you tuck them away. You feel good about those three defensive linemen potentially joining David Stone. But then you look at one more. You got to pretend now. Pretend Oklahoma goes out and they have a great season. Pretend that the Oklahoma defense is back and they have a great year. Can they double back, meaning the Sooners, can they double back on the #1 defensive lineman in America, Williams Nwaneri, who committed to Mizzou about 2 weeks ago, but the Sooners were the heavy favorite heading into that decision. If things go right for Oklahoma this season, do you think that they have a chance to flip Williams Nwaneri from Mizzou?
Yeah, I think that Williams Nwaneri has been perfectly open about the fact that Oklahoma has continued to recruit him beyond his commitment date after he's pledged in favor of the in-state Tigers. Oklahoma, Brent Venables and Miguel Chavis, they haven't stopped recruiting Williams Nwaneri, and I don't expect them or any of these SEC heavyweights to stop recruiting the #1 player in the country. That's just unheard of. Do they have hurdles? Do they have obstacles? Sure. But like you said, if Oklahoma is having a renaissance on defense this season and they are the buzz going into the SEC next year, then they're certainly going to have a fighting shot with the #1 defensive lineman in the country. He's been an Oklahoma lean at different points of his recruitment. Of course, you have to credit Missouri for closing that gap and ascending in his recruitment at crunch time. But that doesn't mean Oklahoma is going anywhere. So I think this might have a few more twists and turns before signing day arrives.
It very well might, but for now, Oklahoma fans can take that exhale. David Stone, the 5-star defensive lineman, is committed. Sam, thanks for dropping by today on the Inside Scoop. Miami got some much-anticipated good news on the recruiting trail. The commitment of Hollywood Chaminade safety Zaquan Patterson, who committed on ESPN during halftime of his nationally televised game. It was the boost that Miami needed as the Hurricanes worked to climb up the 2024 team rankings. But they did miss on 5-star defensive lineman David Stone, and we got to figure out what's next for Miami on the defensive line. So let's bring on Stephen Wagner of Kane Sports. Stephen, you were on the show last Thursday, and we talked, and you had a good feeling that the Canes were going to come out of this going at least 1 for 2. But on Thursday's show, I think you were more confident that they were going to land Stone than Patterson. So it ends up going Miami's way for Patterson. Zaquan Patterson, 4-star safety, #3 ranked safety in America, chooses Miami over FSU, Auburn, and Michigan. Is this recruiting process finished for Patterson, or does Miami need to worry about this OV schedule he has?
I'm not sure if Miami needs to worry about the OV schedule that he has per se, but this recruitment is definitely not over. He's planning on taking a couple more fall visits for games and official visits. He said on Saturday that he plans to be up at the Big House in Michigan for the Michigan-Ohio State game. So that's definitely going to be something to watch because Michigan was a major player in this recruitment. And he actually said going into the week that he felt like Michigan was kind of that front runner early on. And then Miami ended up coming out of that late. But this recruitment is not over for Zaquan Patterson. Like I said, I don't think Miami needs to necessarily be worried because Miami was the favorite and the front runner for such a long time. We had Miami as the very heavy early favorite back in March, and I actually put in an RPM for him to go to Miami back in, I think it was March 31st or something like that, because we were so confident in our intel, and we were so confident that Miami was so far ahead of the rest of the competition that it was going to be the Canes. And he respects the heck out of Mario Cristobal. He has a very, very strong relationship with Miami's coaching staff. And most importantly, I think, the fact that Miami's the hometown school, and he really likes this idea of keeping the elite South Florida talent in South Florida. That's something that you can tell really resonates with him. I really do think that did end up playing a factor in his decision to commit to Miami. So I would definitely say that this recruitment isn't over, but I think Miami has to like the position that they stand in, because it's a heck of a lot harder to flip a kid from a school, convince a kid to decommit, and then go ahead and commit to your school than it is to just keep something that you already have.
Yeah, no doubt. You'd rather have them committed than being out there trying to make these desperate late flips. And, Miami was, like you said, they were the favorite in this one. The recruiting prediction machine had them way out in front for a majority of the offseason. And then late in July, early August, Florida State heats up. They start landing KJ Bolden. They land Charles Lester. It looks like they can't be stopped. And then 48 hours out, all signs were pointing to the Seminoles. We had all the experts on here. You even thought, hey, this one is trending in FSU's direction. But as we've seen, those last 48 hours are critical. Look what happened in Cam Franklin's recruitment. Over and over, we see decisions go sideways in the last 48 hours. So how big was this for Miami to win out over Auburn, FSU, and Michigan for Zaquan Patterson?
It was absolutely massive, considering that this is really what Mario Cristobal was brought in to do. He was brought in to keep elite top 80 prospects in the country in South Florida. He needed to keep Zaquan Patterson home. This absolutely is a massive win for Miami, because this is a prospect they couldn't afford to lose. They're really trying to build that pipeline to Hollywood, Chaminade, Madonna. So that's something that's still ongoing. But Miami also, frankly, needed a blue chip safety in this class. We're probably anticipating there are going to be some future safety depth issues after this year, just because Miami's roster right now is so top heavy really at the safety position. And we definitely think that Zaquan Patterson is a guy who can come in and kind of have that immediate impact. Definitely a really big win for Miami, because I think arguably most importantly, this was a major position of need. Mario Cristobal didn't land a blue chip safety last year. They hadn't landed a blue chip safety yet this year, and they finally get one with Patterson.
All right. Now, Patterson was a massive land for Miami, but there was the nightcap, the commitment that happened in the evening. And that was five-star David Stone. And it kind of the opposite vibe here, Stephen, of what happened with Zaquan Patterson, right? The trend was Oklahoma for the entire offseason, but Miami remained a constant. And in those last 48 hours, we heard a ton of Miami buzz. It almost felt like the opposite was going to happen, where Miami pulled off a huge upset and lands David Stone, but they don't. He ends up committing to the Oklahoma Sooners. How big of a loss was David Stone to Miami's defensive line class?
Well, it's funny that you asked that, Josh, because I was actually having this conversation with someone the other day where they said, well, what's the impact of David Stone going to Oklahoma going to be for Miami? And quite frankly, the answer kind of is there isn't a major impact, because this is a recruitment that isn't going to be over until December. This recruitment will not be over until that pen hits paper on signing day. Yes, David Stone is committed to the Sooners, but Miami has thrown the kitchen sink at David Stone. They've done an excellent job in his recruitment. They did a really tremendous job building relationships with his family. His mother was really, really impressed by the Canes, by Mario Cristobal, by the co-defensive line coaches, Jason Taylor and Joe Salavea. And this was not an easy decision for David Stone at all. We were definitely preparing for the possibility that he did pick the Canes, because he was going completely dark. He was completely quiet leading up to his recruitment, and he made it so that it became very clear that he wanted to be the only person who really knew where he was going to go. So we were prepared for the possibility that it was going to be the Canes because of the really tremendous job that they've done recruiting him. And yes, this really is on paper a loss because Miami needed to land some big-time blue-chip defensive linemen in this class, and we saw those guys kind of go off the board one by one. First Justin Scott, then Cam Franklin, now David Stone going to the Sooners. But Miami is still going to make some very aggressive pushes for David Stone. We definitely think he's going to be back on campus, and we expect December to kind of be, the be-all, end-all before the trade deadline. We think that Miami is definitely going to try to do what they did last year, which is come in very, very aggressively and try to flip some big-time commits just like they did last year. And I think they will try to do the exact same thing with David Stone. I think his recruitment is very far from over.
Yeah, he's had this commitment date of August 26th set for a long time, and I'm sure he's thought a lot about it. But you watched the commitment. I watched the commitment. And I don't know if his family knew he was going to Oklahoma. So did you get that sense when you were watching it? Like, I think he might have just made his decision at the table.
Watching it live, it really was obvious, man. He's keeping everyone in suspense on this one. Like I just said, I really think he wanted to make it so that he knew that he was really the only one who knew exactly where he was going to go. Now, I could say, who knows? Maybe his family was all acting and they knew where he was going all along. But my first thought watching that commitment was, man, I think he just really surprised his own family. You see, his siblings in the background. You see his, mom and dad at the table. And my first thought is, man, I think he might have just surprised his own family.
Yeah, it wasn't like they were shocked or upset. They were happy, don't get me wrong. They were smiling, they were clapping, but I kind of got the sense like they were finding out at the table, which, considering it was Oklahoma, the longtime favorite, I got to believe that Miami had a real shot right before he almost grabbed that Miami hat, put it on, but he's an Oklahoma Sooner, so we will see if they can double back. Miami has a lot of big names on the board. Steven, who can Miami fans kind of turn their attention to now? I know you said they're going to still be big game hunting, but who are some of the names that Miami fans should watch on that defensive line recruiting board?
Well, like I said, I really think David Stone is going to continue to be a guy. Aydin Breland is another guy who is still on the board for the Canes at the moment. 5-star defensive lineman out of Mater Dei that Miami staff really, really loves, and he's been keeping Miami on his radar for quite some time. This is a guy Mario Cristobal actually started recruiting whenever he was in 7th grade, and this was whenever Mario Cristobal was the head coach at Oregon. And, we've heard a lot of buzz about the Ducks for Aydin Breland, but I think he's probably going to be that next kind of, really big name, big talent kid that Miami has remaining on their board. There's some other prospects on their board, but I think Aydin Breland is definitely the biggest name that's going to resonate with the most people.
All right. You kind of hit on it earlier. Miami is stacking commitments from Chaminade Madonna High School, and that's the high school where you want to stack them at. So far, they got Zaquan Patterson. They have 5-star wide receiver JoJo Trader, and there's one more from that school that they'd like to land, and that's the number 1 wide receiver in America, Jeremiah Smith, who's committed to Ohio State. What kind of an impact do you think having Zaquan Patterson and JoJo Trader on the commit list will have on flipping Jeremiah Smith?
Well, I can tell you both Trader and Patterson are both trying to flip Jeremiah Smith to Ohio State. They are trying to keep this Chaminade trio together in Coral Gables. JoJo Trader kind of remarked to me the other day, he said, if I'm able to flip Jeremiah Smith to Miami from Ohio State, you can go ahead and call me the best recruiter in the country. And I told that to Zaquan Patterson after he committed to Miami, and he kind of laughed at that. And he was like, we are going to try to flip Jeremiah from away from Ohio State. Now, of course, we all saw the clip, the interview that he did with ESPN during the Chaminade Madonna game on Saturday, where he said, he definitely plans on being in Columbus in January, but that's not going to stop a lot of people from trying to make some pushes for him. Florida State is still trying to push for Jeremiah Smith. Florida is still trying to push for Jeremiah Smith. Miami feels like this is a prospect they cannot afford to lose. They are still throwing everything that they possibly can at him. But I think the biggest thing for Miami's chances with Jeremiah Smith, it's not going to be whether his teammates and his best friends are going to go play college football at Miami. The biggest thing is going to be, can the Canes produce results in the season? Now, Jeremiah is going to be at the Texas A&M game on September 9th. He's also planning to be at Miami's game against Clemson on October 31st. If Miami's offense can take that drastic step forward, if the Canes can be competitive and or win both of those games and really show that this program is moving in the right direction, that they can be 3, 4, or heck, even 5 wins better if they beat both of those teams, then I think some conversations are definitely going to have to be had about where Miami sits on Jeremiah Smith's radar.
Hey, all they got to do is win. If they win, everything falls into place. Stephen Wagner, thank you for stopping in on a roller coaster ride of a weekend for the Miami Hurricanes and their fans following this recruiting. Appreciate you, Stephen.
Thanks, Josh.
Georgia recruiting in 2024 has kind of gotten quiet in the last few weeks, but it should be expected. The Dogs currently hold 26 commitments in the class as the season is about to kick off. And today, we're going to take a look at Georgia's top 5 most wanted in 2024. Yes, there's still a little bit of room left. Let's bring on Jake Rowe from Dawgs HQ today. Jake, the Dogs, they have the top-ranked class in America, but they're still in the mix for some major recruiting battles. Today, we're going to talk about 5 2024 targets that Georgia is still in pursuit of. Let's start with the 5-star on this list from California, Aydin Breland at Mater Dei High School. Now his teammate Nate Frazier already committed to the Dogs. Can UGA double dip at Mater Dei?
It's going to be tough. Right now, if I had to pick, I like Oregon over Georgia. I mean, I wouldn't even be sure that Georgia's number 2 right now, but I will say this. Georgia's definitely in it. And the weekend that Georgia takes on South Carolina, I believe it's the weekend of September the 16th, is a big date here because that's when Nate Frazier is coming on his official visit, because that's the weekend that Mater Dei is off. They have a bye that week. If they can somehow get Aydin Breland in town on an unofficial visit and maybe kind of have that same time with him that they're going to have with Nate Frazier, I know they're trying. I don't know that I don't know that it's going to happen. I think there's some headway there, but if they can get him there, I think it's kind of all bets are off at that point. But right now, until Georgia gets that visit, or unless Georgia gets that visit, I should say I like Oregon.
Okay. Georgia's been able to get these Mater Dei boys on campus, so I won't count them out. Let's move down to the state of Florida. I want to talk about 4-star defensive lineman LJ McCray, just insane measurables, 6'6", 275, 280 pounds. He can move. He's a run stopper. He can get after the passer. He can do it all. Now, mainly, I thought this was going to be a big 3 battle, Miami, Florida, and Florida State, but then Georgia gets in the mix. Georgia gets him on campus this summer for a visit, and the Dogs are heavily involved in this one. Jake, what's the latest intel on LJ McCray and where the Dogs stand?
They got him on campus for an official visit, and then they got him on campus again right there at the end of that July, quiet period. I think Georgia's definitely in this one, and my gut feeling says Georgia's going to have a great shot here in the end. Florida, listen, if the season goes like a lot of people thinks it's going to go for Florida, that's going to kind of take a little steam out of it. And then you got Georgia doing what it's doing with defensive linemen. I will say this, though. A lot of folks seem to think Georgia, Florida right now. I think Florida State getting this official visit sometime, I believe, in October, like right before he decides. That's one to watch. Florida State's doing a good job recruiting. I like Georgia right here by a nose right now, but I think Florida State can kind of emerge in this one pretty quickly.
All right, another top priority for the Dogs is 4-star cornerback Kam Mickell. He's an in-state target at Statesboro, Georgia. 6 foot, 180. How much are the Dogs in this one, and who's the top competition?
Well, a lot of folks seem to think that Georgia, and I'm not saying a lot of folks in the industry, a lot of people you talk to in and around think Georgia's in good shape. But here's where I'm kind of struggling with this recruitment right now. It seems like this one is trending towards him wanting to play wideout. And if that's the case, I know Georgia's not necessarily recruiting him at wideout right now, or it hasn't in the past. Maybe they're willing to switch gears and kind of, give him a shot. I don't know. But I think that is something you got to keep an eye on. Again, I like Georgia. I think Georgia's in a pretty good spot. But when it comes to, all right, if he's just absolutely dead set on playing wideout, is that going to be a hang-up? Because I think it's a possibility that it could be a hang-up for Georgia.
All right, moving to the state of Virginia, where four-star linebacker Chris Cole is set to make a September decision. Now, this felt like a slam dunk for Georgia in June, heading into July. But then, he sets a couple official visits, sets a commitment date for mid-September. What's your read on where things stand right now with Chris Cole in Georgia?
Well, if he committed today, it would be Georgia. I really believe that. Georgia's been a leader here for a while. The issue that Georgia's going to run into here is he's going to see USC, he's going to see Tennessee right before he makes a decision. Now, the good news for Georgia is Tennessee's kind of getting a Hail Mary type of an official visit, and phenomenal job of them by recruiting him and getting a couple late visits here. But it's not going to be a true official visit because he's got a game on Friday night and he's making a decision on Sunday. It'll be like more of a 24-hour deal, more 36-hour deal as opposed to a full-scale official visit. You can never count out USC with all the opportunities and everything out west. You get kids going out there. Listen, I love LA. I know a lot of other people who do too. So I could never blame the kid for that. But I do like Georgia going into those visits with both of those teams having a chance to kind of turn the worm there.
Yeah, I think it's hard to shoot, Georgia down right now, but I kind of look at that a little bit differently than you do. I look at how can Chris Cole go and visit Tennessee on the same weekend that he's committing and not commit to the Volunteers? It kind of seems like it might line up that way, but what you're saying is that, hey, Josh, it looks like it's going to be an abbreviated visit to Tennessee.
And that might be a little bit of an advantage. It might not. Who knows? I mean, he did visit Tennessee. Georgia was leading going into the unofficial visit to Tennessee there at the end of July whenever Tennessee got him on campus. They impressed him. I heard a lot of good things about the way they felt about that Tennessee visit, okay? Then things kind of died down a little bit, and the Georgia noise started to pick right back up. And I think Tennessee's going to have an excellent shot. Don't get me wrong. But, going into it, I think they've got a lot to overcome there because, you look at what Georgia's done at inside linebacker, what Glenn Schumann's done at inside linebacker. They've accomplished a lot at that position. And, Tennessee's got a lot to sell. They're a program on the rise, and I definitely wouldn't count them out by any means. Maybe that visit being a little shorter might end up helping Georgia. Maybe the timing of it is all Tennessee needs.
Yeah. Hey, you could look at it either way, but either way you look at it, there's still a lot of recruitment left before he makes that final decision. So let's talk about the fifth prospect on this list. Now, he is committed to Florida State. We're talking about five-star safety, KJ Bolden, the number one safety in America. Shocked the recruiting world just a couple weeks ago when he chose FSU over Georgia and Auburn, Ohio State, among others. Jake, is he still in contact with the Georgia staff at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Georgia's still recruiting him, and he's still receptive to that recruitment. I don't think he's going to ever shut Georgia down. But, listen, Georgia recruited this kid hard for over 2 years, and they didn't get him. I think this is really going to come down to maybe what happens with Florida State. Do they live up to expectations? Do they stumble a couple of times and maybe have a disappointing season? Will that even matter? Ultimately, I don't know that Georgia could have done a better job recruiting the kid. I mean, maybe there is, something here or something there that they can say that kind of, clicks with him, down the line. But they put in a lot of effort already. They recruited him very hard. They put their best guys on him, with Kirby having a big part in this thing, Fran Brown, Will Muschamp, ultimately I think he probably sticks with Florida State, but I know that Georgia's not going to give up. And I think that, Florida State might, if he ends up at Georgia, I think it might be a situation where Florida State lost him by maybe losing some momentum during the season. as opposed to maybe Georgia being able to do something that it didn't do over the past 3 years to convince them to come to Georgia.
Yeah, Florida State won 10 games last year, but that's kind of a flash in terms of their recent history. They've been down, so you never know. Florida State does have some expectations to live up to. So if Georgia is to flip KJ, is this one of these ones that fans just have to wait till the end and Georgia's going to make a late try? Or do you see him coming on campus early on in the season and them going for a flip then?
I mean, they'll take it when they can get it. It's one of those deals, man. Honestly, when I feel like when you have a commitment like this one and it's super high profile, it's almost like it's got to be a Jermaine Burton or a George Pickens. And I say those two because those are the two I'm familiar with Georgia. Those were signing day deals. Yeah. Those were things that happened right there at the last moment. And that if I had to predict, if you said, hey, KJ Bolden's going to flip to Georgia, predict when, I'd say on signing day. And I don't expect it to happen, but if it's going to, I think it's going to be at the final hour.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I agree with it. I think a lot of times when these huge, high-profile commitments go down, not to say that they're always going to stick, but they kind of got to take a little breather, let some air back in the room because everything was so tense that it likely does go down to the end. And I'm sure Florida State, they're not going to stop recruiting KJ Bolden just because he's committed. They probably know the same thing. So we'll see what happens there. But Jake Rowe, thanks for stopping by the Inside Scoop to talk about 5 of the most wanted UGA recruits in the 2024 class. Thank you for watching. Make sure you smash that subscribe button for me. And remember to check out all the videos on the On3 YouTube page.